Hello, everyone, and good to see you. Welcome back to Think Big, Act Now. Absolutely delighted to see you again, Douglas. Good day. How are you, firstly?
I'm very grand. The sun is shining. Bank holiday weekend was superb. So I'm very keen to have this conversation today. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
so am I. And AWS are our guests today, as in Tom Allen and Dr. Andrew Jones. Gentlemen, welcome aboard. Thank you for joining us. Absolutely delighted to see you. Um, could you just sort of start us off? Couldn't tell us what you both do, just so we've got a clue. Make sure we've got the right people in the room. So,
Should I go first?
yeah, go for it, Tom.
Yeah, sure. So, hi. So, I'm Tom Allen. So, I lead the NHS focus team in our UK healthcare organisation at AWS, Amazon Web Services.
What does that actually mean in practice?
So, which bit? So, Amazon Web Services is the cloud computing arm of Amazon. The healthcare team sits in an organisation that focuses on public sector organisations. Our healthcare team in Amazon and AWS has three sort of focus areas. So one is around genomics and research. One is around health tech, so companies that build technology for healthcare on AWS, on Amazon Web Services. And then I lead the team that focuses on supporting NHS organisations adopt cloud and innovate on AWS.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you. That helps me. That's better. Got it. Thank you. Andrew.
So I'm Andrew. I'm the head of clinical innovation at AWS. I'm a doctor by background. I was GP for about 15 years, but I've really been in health tech for around 15 years as well. And I've been really working with doctors and patients and leaders in health IT, clinical leaders, particularly in health IT, and how we solve some of the mission challenges of healthcare, how you improve patient experience, how you improve clinical outcomes, how you improve the efficiency and productivity of clinicians using technology. And so my role really at AWS is to help organizations, healthcare organizations, use AWS to its full extent and have an impact on some of those big mission objectives of healthcare.
What brought you into digital health initially? Why that transition from GP land, I guess?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I've always loved technology, from a very young age, and got into medicine. But I've been using a lot of other technology solutions, at university, and suddenly the internet came along, and you could do so many more things. And it was quite a shock when, I started working in a hospital to realize the lack of technology supporting, important processes. And one thing I always remember is filling out blood forms for patients on nutrition being given through their arm rather than because they couldn't feed. And there were about 9 forms that you had to fill in for a week's worth of blood tests. And it just seemed crazy to me. And I retrained, did a master's in artificial intelligence, and then the National Programme for IT came along, and I got much more deeply involved in developing health IT solutions.
Because you, in your role, not as opposed to being one-on-one, through your role, you can impact on thousands, millions of people by the work you do. That's the really interesting bit, isn't it? As opposed to, yes, I can have a very personal interaction with you, Mrs. Whoever, in my surgery. You can now impact such a wider group of people.
Yeah, it's a really good point. I mean, that is one of the things about being a doctor is, you have a scale of one. You can only see one patient at a time, do one operation at a time, and you're right with technology in general, and hopefully in my role too. We can have a potential impact on many more patients, and that's the beauty of technologies, and particularly technologies on cloud, is they scale so much better. We've seen so many examples of over COVID. One of our partners, Humor, they developed a system which allowed doctors to monitor patients at home. So creating virtual wards so that patients who were experiencing symptoms of COVID, they could monitor them at home, and so one doctor could look after hundreds of patients using a dashboarding system, and they could monitor their oxygen saturations, their blood pressure, their pulse, and one doctor could do 100 patients rather than one one at a time. And that is the amazing impact of some of these technologies.
Yeah, and I think that mostly brings us to, you know, the nub of this, isn't it? Is what you two have seen over the last 12 months or so that has really struck you in terms of the scale, speed of change, or interventions that have made the biggest difference. What struck the pair of you? Say, Tom, what struck you in particular over the last 12 months? What have you seen happening?
I think, I mean, Sandra and I were talking about this before. I think you know, necessity is not, you know, it's not just the mother of invention. I think it's the mother of adoption. I mean, some of the tools that we've seen adopted at scale have been around for years, and yeah, and it's the fact that there's been sort of the removal of the alternative of the business as usual approach has meant that that now is the way you do things. So if I think of one of our partners, Attend Anywhere, who provide a platform for consultations in secondary care, that's, you know, that there was, I mean, I was speaking to a chairman of a trust that talked about trying to implement something similar for remote consultations prior to COVID, and had a real backlash from the clinical community. And he now has a clinical community that actually are asking why we weren't doing this before. And it's so, you know, it's that fact that they've been forced into this situation means they've adopted it, and actually it's not as scary as they might have thought it was. And actually it's not, you know, it's not the silver bullet that's going to solve all problems. So I think that I would say that the fact that removal, it's been obvious, but the removal of the business as usual approach has meant that people have had to adopt things, and actually it's been in many instances really successful.
No, that's a great point there, Tom. I'm just very keen to talk about the compelling event, which obviously was COVID, that removed one of the biggest barriers that we have. And this new way of working, coupled by expectations from service users. User experience, we know, is something that is very, very high on the agenda now. And so I guess those, and the political drive is there as well. So you've got all these factors coming to bear to address some of the problems. And as a clinician myself, we always want to know, why wasn't this done before? So I was very happy to hear Dr. Andrew Jones's journey, because I guess that resonates a lot with me. But in terms of the last 12 months, as we have been working at pace, and there's a quote I heard the other day, actually on the train, it was, you cannot be neutral on a moving line. And the NHS feels like we're going so fast ahead with technology, sometimes before we can even praise it. You know, can you just talk you through, this to both of you, the last 12 months, and I'm keen to find out about the Attend Anywhere, Track and Trace, how Amazon has been involved in that as well.
I think it's a great point, Douglas. I think what people had to get used to was a change in expectations. You know, for many of us who've been working in health IT in the NHS for a number of years, we expect solutions to take years, you know, maybe a couple of years to procure or to build. And what we saw was that actually from being asked to develop a new solution from scratch, some of them were being developed within days and no more than weeks for most of them. So, for example, Amazon and AWS were asked to support with the PCR testing program. So the home testing program. And one of the ideas was Amazon would deliver home testing kits to people's doors so that they didn't have to leave the house, because we were in lockdown at that time. But we needed a digital platform upon which people could request those tests. Now that digital platform took 5 days over a weekend, a long weekend, to stand up. So we went from nothing to having a fully functioning platform integrated with Amazon, and all the logistics being put behind that within 5 days. You know, and the Test and Trace app was another great example. You know, that was developed from scratch, completely new technology, really. No similar application like that in place, you know, in this country at that time. It was built within 12 weeks, you know, on the cloud. And people were allowed to not only go fast, but also try things. And if they didn't work, there wasn't a huge investment. You only may have put 2 or 3 days into seeing if something had worked, and then you could try something else, you know, if you needed to. So that change in expectations from the people who were asking us to help them develop and build things completely changed over the period.
What are the lessons from that then? What is it that you've learned, the NHS has learned, do you think, from that? What stands out?
I think there's something around just get on, just get on with it, just start. If you it's like, because you can iterate as you go along. It doesn't have to be you don't have to have the final final answer from the start before you get going. You can work that out and change direction and pivot as you progress. And I think and there's a number of there was a number of projects that we were witness to or part of that really embraced that approach and just start and modify as you move as the world changes, or as it might not be quite right. I think and I think we're starting to see more of that as that's just as a way of working and accepting that more agile, I suppose, is the word I look for, a more agile approach.
Yeah, that's a good word. So Andrew, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think one of the other things that we noticed which had changed was because of the pandemic, people were focusing on the real problem that needed to be solved. So often we start in the middle of the journey. We say, oh, we need an app, or we need an EPR, or we need an HIE, and we start from that point. Whereas what we noticed in the pandemic was we're starting from the real problem. I need to get a test to people's homes. I need to monitor people without bringing them into hospital. I need to get people information from lots of disparate sources to this point of decision making. And by starting at that real root problem and working backwards from that problem to the solution, I think we saw some remarkable improvements in the outcomes.
Sure. And in terms of this is truly transformational in terms of what you're talking about, working for a problem and providing a digital solution to that. Dr. Andrew, you talked about your journey from paper record to electronic, that transformation. Are you seeing that new capabilities are being found or discovered through some of the adoption of your new solutions that were never fathomed in the business case?
Yeah, I think, there's a great example, and I'm probably going to get the numbers slightly wrong, but and I think it comes back to the fact that it created this environment where people had to experiment and try things. So there was, I think it was down in Hampshire. I think it was Hampshire was one of our partners worked with Hampshire Social Care in a department of the council to set up a vulnerable person monitoring service. And really what that was using cloud-based contact center technology, so telephony solutions, to make outbound calls to thousands of vulnerable people in their homes, using chatbot technology to basically check up on them. Here is a kind of experimenting with telephony solutions and chatbots to make thousands of outbound calls. I think is a really interesting example.
I think so too. Go on, Richard. I could see.
I was just picking up on your point about Andrew, about you're not starting in the middle. I want an app or whatever, but starting with what do we want to achieve. What's making me smile, I guess, is that when we do scoping, that's what we ask for every time. That's actually what we're all trying to do, aren't we? Sat on, particularly on this side. But it's amazing how often it gets lost in this predetermined solution that people want. But actually, that's what good scoping is about, ultimately, isn't it? It's what's the problem we're trying to solve?
Absolutely. And we actually have a process at AWS and Amazon, to try and force that thinking. So it's called the working backwards method. And really, you do have to say, right, who is the customer or patient or clinician? What is their problem? What is the fundamental challenge that they are trying to solve, and how can we make that better? And then the first document we write is what we call a PRFAQ. Now that is a press release, and it's a single page, and it describes exactly the press release that we will release at the end of the development.
Oh,
so
brilliant.
It says, today AWS will release this service which does these things, and this is why we built it, and this is what our customer said about it. And so you focus immediately on what your outcome is going to be, and then you start scoping, and then you start building, and all of those sorts of things.
So I'm conscious of time running away from us, and we haven't got long left. So at a practical level, if you were engaging with a trust tomorrow, wrestling with things like the backlog and all the things they're wrestling with, what would be the one or two areas that you would encourage them to adopt, or things to think about, the things to do that would just get stuff moving, backlog shifted, what would be top of your list? What were the things you'd grasp at?
I think there's
Mr. Tom?
yeah, I think there's there's a few things. Someone said to me recently, if everything's a priority, then nothing's a priority. So there is obviously something about prioritizing, and what are the real priorities. I think there's a few. I mean, we often look at when we're working with organisations, what are people doing that they don't need to be doing. One of these areas, like admin, is always one. It's how do you help people operate? A phrase that often gets used: operate at the top of their license. So do the things that they are qualified to do, and then be able to offload other stuff to other people. And at some point, some of those things you can offload to technology, you can offload to be automated in some way. I think there's that. I think there's also, for me, where are opportunities to scale things quickly. So we talked before about an example of just using simple like telephony technology. Again, do you need a person to be making phone calls? Maybe not, but those are certain areas you'd look at. So I think it's probably something around kind of something around prioritizing. Absolutely, something around what can you offload and automate to free people up, because ultimately workforce is the sort of rate limiting factor in terms of how much throughput you can have. I think certainly those would be areas that I would.
And that workforce thing's a global issue, isn't it? We know we such a desperate shortage that we have to. The model we've got at the moment will not exist in the future because we can't man it, can we? Yeah, we can't operate it in a way. Sorry, Andrew, I stopped you. What comes top of the list for you then?
I mean, I think some of that automation is really important. I mean, about 50% of clinical time is taken up with administration, and a lot of that can be automated, and there's lots of ways in which we can do that. I mean, another great example, along the lines that Tom was talking about, we have one partner who developed a Facebook Messenger integrated chatbot because what they've done is they developed this Facebook outreach program for breast cancer screening, because of course women between the ages of 45 and 60 are now the Facebook generation, and so actually engaging people through that, it can remove some of the inequalities of access to care, and that really improved their uptake of breast cancer screening by about 13%. But the Facebook generation, they want answers to their questions 24/7. Now, if you phone up the breast cancer screening unit, and you are say, well, when's my appointment? How long will it take? What do I need to bring? When will I get my results? That takes up clinical time. And clinical time, which is best spent with patients in the unit. So this Facebook Messenger chatbot using Lex, which is the cloud version of Alexa, that allowed these users to ask questions to the chatbot. The chatbot would give them the answers. If there was a question it couldn't answer, it would be referred on to a clinician, but saved an enormous amount of time for clinicians, so they could focus on, as Tom says, the higher value care, providing care for the patients actually on the unit.
Yeah,
excellent.
There's something in that as well, which often, I know that you probably heard this before, but there's when you're looking at workforce and resources, there's somebody involved in care that is very vested in the delivery of that care, that quite often is very passive in the delivery of that care, and that's the patient. And actually, what can you do to put power into the patient's hands to give them greater control over what care they're getting as well, and involve them more in that process. I think that's a really good example of where that was that was brought to the fore.
That's an excellent point, because there's nothing more empowering than an empowered patient, right?
Absolutely.
That's the untapped resource that you have sitting side by side. Dr. Andrew Jones, you would know that when a patient can come to the table with some level of knowledge and understanding of what they want and know where they can tap into some of those resources is superb indeed.
Absolutely right. Yeah, and I think increasingly people want to self-care and they want to have that control, don't they? They want to be able to, order their own medications, order their own appointments, shift an appointment without spending, 20 minutes waiting on a phone. These things are stuff we got used to in every other aspect of our lives, and citizens as patients are now demanding the same kind of centricity around them.
And again, it doesn't have to be the silver bullet. It doesn't have to be perfect and solve all problems. But if it gets, if it puts a 10% dent in the problem, then that's 10% you didn't have yesterday. So I think it's I think probably going back to the question of what you advise trusts to do, and it's about, again, comes back to, it doesn't need to be perfect. Perfect doesn't need to be the enemy of good. Healthcare is a bit more challenging than doing your banking, because people die or get very sick and it impacts the quality of life. So there are other risks that aren't necessarily present in other sectors, but they can be managed, and being pragmatic and thoughtful in your approach, you can navigate and mitigate a lot of those.
Thank you. I'm afraid I'm going to have to call us to a halt. I feel miserable. So thank you both, Tom and Andrew, for what you've contributed this morning.
Thank you very much for your time.
Great.
Thank you. We won't keep you any longer, but thank you so much, gents. Really
Okay.
good.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers,
Thanks
guys.
for your help.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Douglas. Good afternoon.
Looking rather dapper in the big.
Hey, I've gone. It's a movement, you tell me, and I'm here supporting it. Every movement needs a t-shirt, so that's what I've got. So
absolutely. Mine's in the background. Andrew and Tom.
Hi, Tom. Hi, Andrew.
How are you doing?
Hi, Andrew. We just want to say thank you very much. That was such a inspirational and informative conversation that we had. One that left me feeling rather energized and frightened at the same time, knowing that the Facebook generations are the 35 to 50-year-olds.
You both painted a picture of what's possible, right? And there is so much possible. I don't think we've even scratched the surface. So I've got to ask, what's getting in the way? What stops us doing all the things? We only did 10% of the things that are in your head. We'd change health. So what gets in the way?
I can have a stab at that if you want, Andrew.
Go for it. Go on.
Okay. I think capacity. We talked about workforce, and I think that is that's a challenge. That people are busy. There isn't spare capacity lying around to get stuff done, or if it is, it's difficult to lay your hands on. That's certainly one of the things I would say. So having some sort of capacity and sort of headspace to think about going after some of these innovations, implementing them, and the sort of change management process. In many ways, the tech bit's simple. It's how you embed it is the challenge.
Tom, if I can, just as an analogy, I know Douglas likes them, so I haven't done one all week, so I'm going to do one. It's a bit like you're late for an appointment. You're driving. Remember the old days? We used to drive to appointments. You're driving to an appointment. You're late, and you've got to go fast, but you're running out of fuel. And you're so close to empty, you think, God, I better slow. I need to stop. I haven't got time to stop. But therefore, to get there with the fuel I've got, I'm going to have to drive a little more slowly. And I don't know which one to adopt. But ultimately, the truth is, I've got to stop. I've got to fill up and progress, right? And we can't keep putting capacity, space, tired in the way, because we will never actually fundamentally change this, because we're always going to be short of petrol unless we stop and do something fundamental here. Maybe that's a tortuous analogy, but I tell you, that's what it feels like to me.
Yeah, good analogy. I think the other thing, and we just talked about it actually, is clarity of purpose, isn't it? Starting with a fundamental issue, being clear about what you're trying to solve, and then moving directly towards that. And I also think the technology, and we say the technology is so much easier, but there's good reason for that. It's because some of the pieces are already in place. When I started building technology solutions 15 years ago, you had to build everything from scratch. If you wanted a voice-enabled tool, you had to build a voice recognition service. Now you don't need to do that. You can just pull the pieces together, and that makes life so much easier, and accelerates things enormously.
That's great, because they talk about the best of breed type approach into health, which supports what you're saying, Andrew. There's a point that I think Tom was raising about capacity and resources as well, and using the patient as part of that solution. Is there any other ways that we can bring the patient more front and center in their own care?
Yeah, and I think we talked about it a little bit. I think, in almost every other part of our lives, we've got more control than we've ever had before. Banking, transport, travel, you name it. In every situation, we are self-serving. We've got more information to make our decisions, and also as a consequence, it's more efficient in those industries to deliver to deliver the service, because the customer, the end user, is doing some of the work for you. So it's a win-win, and I think patients are begging for that opportunity to use better information to make choices of their own and self-service, and that will help the rest of the health system, because it will relieve a lot of those tasks away from the workforce.
Excellent. See you nodding there, Richard.
You were going to go for a question from Kamal, weren't you? So I've got one in here. Do you think the COVID-19 pandemic has helped our digital technology scientists to engage more in implementing their knowledge and skills in the NHS? Yeah. So has COVID helped us get people like you to engage more in implementing their knowledge and skills in the NHS?
Well, I think people in our position, we've always been really enthusiastic to have an impact, and I think I think that we'll have to see what happens post-pandemic about people's attitudes towards lots of things, whether it's science or technology. But I think my feeling is that they've seen the benefits that these technologies can bring. They've seen how it can deal with the biggest world health issue we've ever experienced, and I think it is inevitable that both the leaders within health systems, but also patients, are going to be far more demanding of more of these tools to deal with everything else that the healthcare system has to deal with.
Excellent. And there was a question I have to ask in the short time that we have. That's in relation to the way we think. And outside of technology, in the last conversation, you were talking about different philosophies. You write your business case first, literally, like the outcomes of it first, and you live the project backwards. So you put out what you intend to happen first, and you live according to that. Are there any other analogies, such as the two-way door one, that you want to share before we close?
We cut the two-way door out from time, so it might be worth just covering up on that, because it really was a good example.
Well, that's one that I think is really empowering. So that this is the concept of enabling and empowering people to make decisions, and we use the term one-way door or two-way door. So two-way door is something that you can make a decision, you can try and implement something. If it doesn't work, you can back out of it. And at Amazon, and certainly at AWS, we're empowered and encouraged to make two-way door decisions, to innovate, to try stuff and experiment. One-way door is those decisions that are very difficult to back out of, and those are the ones that require greater analysis, a level of data and understanding of what you're getting yourself into. And those, so actually, just by calling that out and making that whole concept really explicit, you suddenly free people up to go out and try stuff, and just to think first, actually, if I do this, is this a two-way door? Can I back out of it? And it's and it's not something that we live in Amazon in terms of fostering innovation.
Yeah. And I mean, the two-way door analogy is a great one. And also, I mean, think big. And I know it's the subject of all of your talks, but it's also a principle that we have in AWS and Amazon. We have a number of leadership principles, the top one being customer obsession, but think big is right up there. If you think small, you're likely to be rewarded for thinking in that way. If you think big, you'll be rewarded for thinking in that way.
And there's probably one more, just looking at time, there's probably one more that is we have is invent and simplify. So these are things we're all encouraged to do, but we talk about this. This is the way we do things, unless you know a better way, and therefore if you know a better way, implement the better way. And that's another one that's probably worth throwing in there.
That's an excellent piece of advice, and we really enjoyed our conversation. We look forward to being in touch as well. I know the audience were really engaged with the conversation, that we learned a lot, particularly from such a big company as Amazon AWS entering the health space, adding a lot more value. So thank you very much, Dr. Andrew Jones and Tom Allen. Richard, for your time as well.
Great.
Thank you very much. Everybody have a great weekend. We're on next Friday, 2 p.m, if I've got it right. So we're back with you then. So nothing during the week next week. And it's every Friday from here, 2 p.m. Put it in the diary, continuing these conversations. It might be later today or tomorrow. The recording of our discussion with Tom and Andrew will be on the website. I know Catherine is sharing the link with you. It'll be up there tomorrow, so you can share it with any of your colleagues, share it widely and far, and please come back to us. And next Friday, Catherine's just told me, is John O'Broad, Senior Manager for Personal Care at NHS England. He's talking about all the things we've been talking about, but from the patient perspective, which has been a recurrent theme throughout, but he's picking that one up next week. Join us, think big, act now. Have a great weekend, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Take
you.
care, guys.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
I really enjoyed that, Richard. I think your questions there were on point. That just set the scene for them to talk in a bit more detail, because it's such a massive company, Amazon. You know, AWS, you would want them to have a bit more time, because most people just know the consumer grade stuff.
Yeah.
You see, but they're adding a lot of value, and the partnership route is for me is the best way forward. You know, they're not saying we could do all ourselves, but we have partners,
Yeah,
specialists who can bring that solution to scale very quickly.
yeah.
And I think your videos do that. You know, how omnipresent are the videos that you post?
Yeah, yeah. That scalability just kept coming back and back from both of them, didn't it? We didn't sort of get away from it, but at the same time, what struck me was how simple they kept things as well. You know, like that PRFAQ, cracking up, you know, simple stuff. You know,
the one pager.
Yeah, one pager. That's what we'll be announcing, you know, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months down the line. That's what it's going to look like. And I thought that was really good. And his story just now, Tom's story just now about one-way doors and two-way doors.
Yeah.
You know, that you can keep going. If you've got a two-way door, you can always back out. Keep testing, keep trialing. They were, motivational for me. I thought, both in terms of running a company and think about what we do as a company, but equally for, and more important, you could argue, for trusts. Believe in what you're doing, go for it. And they both talked about empowering the patient and then flip to empowering the staff member. It was amazing.
Those are themes that we are seeing emerging, and sharing those stories on this platform, Think Big, Act Now, is the right way forward, because you're condensing a lot of good practice, both from the NHS perspective, commercial perspective, all to one focal point to bear over a period of time, and you can just tune in and you be inspired. Like when I finish today, I'm going to ask myself, am I going through a two-way door or one-way door? You know, there's the reverse engineering has never been more better articulated in that one pager. You know, you announce it, then you live up to the expectations of your announcement. This is what I teach people when I'm doing therapy for people who are depressed. I say, look, write your eulogy now. How would you want to be remembered, and live up to that? So they're bringing together lots of unorthodox way of thinking and behaving in a digital environment, because we know from use cases, to build a use case, do a business case, you know, and you know a trust might struggle to do a business case for like 6 weeks. I've written some myself in my past, and taken months to author, of which as you're ruminating and deliberating on the word and semantics, the problem's still persisting.
Yes, it is. And there's patients out there who are still struggling as a consequence.
Exactly. So the one pager one for me is a take home one pager, put it down there. I would have even gone further, say, do you know what? 2 lines. You can always keep shrinking.
Thank you once again.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you. Yeah, it's always a pleasure.